Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And fetch an old man another blanket.
And maybe a glass of water.
Or maybe a glass of...
I don't know what that's from.
I don't know what that is either, but yeah.
But we're doing Gladiator, which is what the first part
It's
was
funny,
from.
you said, let's get started, and then I, panicked because I didn't have a quote, and that's the first thing I pulled out of my brain.
Let's get it started in here.
Yeah, exactly. Podcasting.
Yeah, we're doing Gladiator from the year 2000, one of the greatest movies of all time, maybe.
I think this movie is in my top 10.
Wow.
Yeah, I really liked it.
I think that this movie was in my top 10 at some point in time. It's still my top 100, but it's dropped a little bit. It's dropped a little bit.
Dropped a little. You know what? Can we just get right into it? So in our last week's episode, our primer episode, you talked about how you had some notes about this movie and that you think it has flaws.
Yes.
So why don't we just get that out of the way? What do you not like about this movie?
Ooh, we're going with flaws first. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me scroll down.
Oh, yeah.
Because
okay.
I have notes on this movie.
Okay, for those of you at home, Blake and I record these episodes in his studio, i.e. his basement. And we did the primer episode. I went to take a leak. As I was walking back to my chair, I glanced at your laptop and I saw a massive Word document sitting on your screen, and I was like, oh no.
This is what happens when you watch a movie anywhere from 12 to 20 times. And I, like I said, have seen this movie a lot. This is in my top, maybe even top 10 of most watched films of all time for me.
Okay, interesting. And you know what? I've only seen it twice.
Yeah.
So that would change your relationship a little bit.
Yes, for sure,
It's like the difference between the honeymoon stage and the mutual grievances stage of a relationship. I don't know.
And mutual grievances I have, because like I said, I think this is a great movie, but I would reserve giving this a perfect score because, okay, you ready to get into my thoughts?
Always.
The first one's kind of lame and nitpicky, but I'm still going to bring it up because I think it is relevant. There's some slow-mo in this movie.
Okay, yeah, I did want to talk about the slow-mo. Yeah.
And I think that the slow-mo is widely used in the early 2000s because of something like The Matrix, kind of making this something that,
I suppose, yeah. I didn't really think about that, but you may be right.
It gets used pretty heavily in the battle sequence, which, again, I said on the primer episode, is in the top 10 of battle sequences and of all movies, I think, ever. Maybe even top 5, debatably.
But yeah, debatably.
I think that there's some sequences there where it gets used and some sequences later in the film that get used. And I don't know that it quite works. I think the best parts of this movie are when it's operating in real time.
It certainly looks conspicuous, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It certainly calls attention to itself. Where you're like, oh, it's all right.
Yeah.
Did Zack Snyder come in to direct this scene?
And you know what? Even on that note of Zack Snyder, I think that Zack Snyder probably was heavily influenced by Gladiator when he made 300.
Probably, yeah.
Because aside from me not understanding that Gerard Butler and Russell Crowe were different people in the early 2000s, they do have kind of very striking similarities between the two, and they look very similar in even how they're portrayed in those two movies. But in addition to that, some of the stylization choices of Rome in this movie, I found, actually thinking about it, do carry over a little bit into 300 stylization.
I suppose it's just, and I'm kind of just articulating this now, I think the slow motion would maybe work in a more exaggerated movie like 300 or just a Zack Snyder movie. But in this kind of more grounded, realistic movie, the slow motion kind of just, you're like, oh, what are we doing? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little jarring in my opinion, and again, that's a small nitpick, though, because I feel like that doesn't overall take away too much from the movie. It's just a choice that was made that I don't necessarily agree with.
I'm inclined to agree.
The other kind of thing, and this is such a big topic of conversation that we're going to have to dive really into detail into, is Joaquin Phoenix's character, Commodus. Why is he so comically evil? Okay. There's two parts to this, and I don't believe that him and Maximus have a history together, whereas I believe Maximus has a history with all of the other characters.
You think they're just meeting? It seems like they're just meeting for the first time. Is that what you're saying?
I just don't find their chemistry to match in my head what I would see those two characters past looking like.
What would you see those two characters past looking like?
So, and have this conversation, we kind of have to talk in detail about all of the other characters and their histories, because we have to look at Maximus as a character and his relationship to Marcus Aurelius, who there's obviously like a father-son kind of relationship there.
Mm-hmm.
They've obviously, like, Maximus obviously throughout most of his childhood must have been very close to the Marcus Aurelius family.
Right.
And
Because he also has this kind of like childhood romance going on with Lucilla.
Yes, and him and Lucilla, I believe, like I said in the primer episode, in my heart of hearts, that these two have a deep history together, that, you know, that there was some sort of childhood love, like that first romance that you have with, you know, the only other person in your small town that you feel like deeply connected to, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And like for me, like I was like, yes, I understand, like I see this two characters, like I don't need any more explanation, because I feel it in these two characters whenever they meet, that there's that deep rich history.
And
it's the same thing again, like I said with Marcus Aurelius, like I feel that these two characters, that Marcus Aurelius was a father-like figure to Maximus.
Well, they were on campaign. They've presumably been on campaign together for many years.
Yeah, right. And all of that, just like I said, I strongly feel like that was something that happened, and that's a positive to this movie, and something that when it's used it's often used, I find, in like these kind of like almost fictionalized or like, you know, pre-medieval, like Roman Empire,
like
type
antiquity kind of thing.
Yeah, like Game of Thrones also uses this really well, and Lord of the Rings uses this very well, where you get dropped off in a world and it feels like this world is alive, like there's all this prehistory, and these characters aren't just being born at the moment of the start of the film.
It's not like as soon as the camera starts rolling, the character starts existing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It also kind of works, I was thinking, just for the ages of the characters. Like I think Russell Crowe was 35 when he did this
Something
movie.
like that, yep.
Lucilla, I'm assuming, is around that same age. And then Marcus Aurelius is just kind of ancient. So, you know, this is a movie, it's not like a YA kind of story. These are adults.
Yes.
These are adults, Blake.
Yes.
With they would have mortgages
yes.
if they were alive today. So I think that kind of lends itself to just kind of the age and stage of the characters.
Mm-hmm. So in picturing now, talking about getting to Commodus and Maximus's relationship, there's some allusions, like, and this is where it's the tell and maybe not the show that kind of grated me a little bit. But Marcus Aurelius basically says to Maximus, "Oh, like I know that you don't see eye to eye with Commodus or whatever kind of thing." And you know what Commodus is like, you know, and I couldn't see him ruling, and all of this stuff happens in the opening sequences of the movie after the battle. And I just think that if I were to kind of do this movie, and I guess I would say that I'll stop myself and I'll say that having watched something like Ben-Hur and seeing the relationship of Judah Ben-Hur, and I can't even remember the
bad
villains.
guy.
Yeah, the bad guy of that movie. And seeing just like this relationship of these two men who grew up very closely together around each other, and just seeing them kind of take different life turns, I think that that's done a little bit better in a movie like that. But I also think that Maximus would maybe proceed with a little bit more cautious around Commodus. Like, he openly questions Commodus's authority after this when they're all celebrating. Like, he doesn't take his arm. Like, he doesn't seem to really care about the guy at all. And like, I feel like, I guess here's the other thing is, as a child, you don't tend to see the flaws in other people. You might not be friends with somebody for one reason or another, but for these three people to have grown up together and been so close, and it seemed like at one point maybe these guys were close together, I think that there would be almost like a little bit more hesitancy or friction between their relationships. Like, I feel like Commodus would see him more like a little bit more like a brother. Yes, there would still be the jealousy there, but it would be like Commodus trying to be close with him, and Maximus maybe trying to keep him at a distance, but also having like some sort of brotherly love for him, and that never really becomes apparent to me.
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying. My interpretation of their relationship is that there wasn't really much of a relationship. Mm-hmm. Like, he's obviously close with Marcus Aurelius because that's his boss.
Yep.
He obviously was close with Lucilla because that was, an old flame. But, like, I kind of saw it more as, like, they were almost more like acquaintances. I can't really picture them hanging out as kids. You know what I mean?
Right.
Also, like, what is the age gap? Because Russell Crowe is obviously older than Joaquin Phoenix's character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how old would Joaquin Phoenix have been when they shot this movie? Like 25?
I will tell you right now. Russell Crowe would have been about 35. And yeah, Joaquin Phoenix is about 10 years younger than him. So he'd be like the annoying little brother.
That's kind of what I thought. Like, it was almost like, or maybe even, and this is just what I'm thinking now, like, you know how the annoying cousin you have that you're not super close with? I hope that particular cousin is not watching, listening right now. But, like, Commodus shows up and he's like, oh, Rome salutes you. Like, I embrace you as a brother. And Maximus just kind of like, thanks. Like, It's very like,
Right.
It didn't even seem so much as, like, not exactly revulsion, but a little bit of, like, I think maybe, okay, let's get...
The defenses get up, though. Like,
his hackles raise a little bit, right? But I don't think it's, like, hatred. I think it's more just slight disdain.
Right.
And I mean, think about it. Like, look at Maximus and look at Commodus. Could you ever, if you put those two alone in a room together in different circumstances, would they ever find anything to talk about?
Yeah.
It seemed more like, Maximus was being respectful and professional, but a little bit curt. The way you are with people you work with but aren't super close with. So I don't know that they were trying to imply some kind of...
No, it's not quite a Ben-Hur relationship.
No, and I think also, like, the fact that they don't have much of a relationship maybe just stokes the Commodus's flames a little bit higher, because, like, think about it. I really like Commodus as a villain. I really, really think the writing and the acting really elevated this character. Like,
I like the acting, but we're going to get into more Commodus writing issues that I have.
Okay, well, no, but I mean, think about it. Like, your father, Marcus Aurelius, who Commodus claims has never paid him a compliment or given him a full hug,
right,
really cherishes and heaps praise onto Maximus.
Yes. And in, like, a very public way.
Yeah, really. And, like, that scene early on after the battle is kind of heartbreaking from Commodus's perspective, because he shows up and he's like, Rome salutes his greatest general. I embrace you as a brother. Maximus just kind of like, thanks. And he's like, oh, father, take my arm. And then, like, Marcus Aurelius just pretty much brushes him off in full view of everyone else, right? He's like, I'm just going to get on my horse. And then he's weak and his health is failing him. So he kind of, like, seems unsteady in his saddle, and it's Maximus who steps forward and, like, steadies him.
Right.
Right? Like,
yep.
Imagine that. Commodus is just getting the cold shoulder from everybody.
Right.
And then, of course, like, we need to talk about Commodus's leanings towards his own sister.
Okay, here's writing issue number 2 or 3 here now. This is my other critique of this, is does the incestuous relationship actually need to happen in this movie?
Well, Blake, I don't mind telling you that I am not pro-incest. But I think it fits for this character.
I have my reservations, and here's the thing.
Okay.
And I really thought about this a lot, because this is one of, I think, the thing that kind of takes me out of this movie the most is that relationship, because in a sense, it feels like Commodus is trying to get back at Maximus by trying to hook up with his own sister. But
doesn't that make sense, though? Like,
in a sense it does, but here's the thing, is at the time that Maximus is really starting to lean into that storyline and hint into his sister, at that point, he doesn't know that Lucilla and Maximus are plotting together.
No, but he would be aware that they had a previous relationship.
Right.
And I mean, again, think about it from Commodus's perspective. Your dad, who you spent your whole life trying to impress, basically wants nothing to do with you and is actively handing what you consider your own birthright to him.
Yeah.
And then your presumably older sister, who you may have apparently had the hots for all this time, wants nothing to do with you, but had a previous relationship with Maximus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is something pitiful and sad about Commodus, right? Like,
right.
His own father loved Maximus more, and his own sister loved Maximus more, right? You can see how that would turn your heart into, like, a bubbling cauldron of envy.
I still bounce off of the use of it in here like quite a bit.
Does it just feel a little like cheap and exploitative?
Yeah, maybe that's nailing it there. But even like reading about the real life Commodus, he actually had his sister assassinated because he learned that she was trying to have him assassinated. So, you know, there is kind of a bitterness between the two of them in real life as well. But it feels like too comically evil. Like at this point in time, we know that Commodus is an absolute one of like the biggest narcissists that we've seen.
Well, I mean,
on the screen.
as soon as he shows up on screen, you know he's a bad dude. I mean, it's Joaquin Phoenix. Of course it is.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and as the movie goes on, the last like 20 minutes of the film, when he's tearing her into her and tearing her apart, like that all makes sense to me. But why do we need the incest piece in there? I just think that it's unnecessary.
I think my interpretation was that maybe Commodus clung to his older sister for some security over the years, like daddy's not around.
Yep.
You know, off campaigning.
And he's like says in the opening scene that he appears in that, you know, he's mistrustful of the Senate, right?
Right. So I can see how maybe he would have glommed onto his sister.
Yeah.
And maybe those emotions would have twisted in his head. What I find compelling about Commodus as a villain, and kind of pitiful, not sympathetic, pitiful, is that he reminds me of like a black hole. And he just
the everything bagel.
The everything bagel, right? Like he just desperately wants to be loved.
Right.
By his father, by his sister, by the people of Rome. Like he almost kind of reminded me of Michael Scott from The Office, right? Like just this desperate, all-consuming need for approval.
Yes.
And then when he doesn't get it, he becomes vengeful.
Yes.
Yeah, like even...
But his sister, like, stands by him, and she's, like, probably his closest, like, confidant and stuff. I just don't think that it's necessary, and I think that the movie is just as good, if not better, if that isn't included in this movie.
Yeah, and you might be right, and we don't live in that timeline, but,
yes,
like,
exactly.
You know, you're right. And, but I don't know. I found Commodus infinitely compelling as a villain, and... I don't even really know that I agree that he's comically evil. I do think he has nuance and depth. Like, the scene where he kills his father is genuinely chilling. Right? Like, I would butcher the whole world if you would only love me.
Yeah. So here's the thing, is like, I'm saying he's comically evil, but I'm not necessarily saying that that is the case in this situation. I just think scenes like him being incestuous with his sister cross that threshold.
Yeah, potentially.
Because the rest of his portrayal as a like evil narcissistic
like
dirtbag,
a spoiled man-child,
is really, really well done. And not only that, is it feels, and we don't need to get into politics at all, but it definitely feels like this is something that is ever present, that, you know, we have these kind of people who
I wonder who you're talking about in November of 2024. Yeah,
exactly.
And again, that's what I found so compelling about Commodus. Like, I don't think he actually wants to be emperor. I think he just wants he just wants all eyes on him.
Yeah, he
right?
wants to be a deity. Like, he wants to be worshipped as a god because he is such a narcissist. And I found that even like, and this is, again, like, I will praise like the performance and the writing here. He's such a weak narcissist that he actually is so easy to manipulate that the Senate, the very people that he says in the beginning that you cannot trust are the people who are easily able to manipulate in the palm of his hands, right? Like, he gets under that one senator's hand, and that guy just like works him like a puppet, right?
Yeah, no, it's funny, you know, again, and I'm not talking about anyone specifically, wink, 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 but like, it's like he wanted the throne so that he could achieve and bask in all this unconditional love that he thought he would receive, only to then realize that, like, by taking the throne, he's opened himself up to more scorn and more ridicule.
And scrutiny.
Yeah, it's almost like watching Commodus is like watching a man unravel throughout the course of the movie, right? And it's so pitiful.
Well, and that, to me, is the core theme of this movie, is legacy and what do you leave behind, right? And like the vision that you have of other people having of you, and That's something that Maximus in the opening scenes, I think, really cares about, is the legacy that he leaves behind. It's very apparent that's all Commodus wants, is to be loved and to be remembered as a god.
Well, it's so funny. There's this moment I want to bring up. Maximus does have a really interesting conversation with the late, great Richard Harris in the early parts of the movie. Marcus Aurelius is kind of musing philosophical about his legacy, and he's like, what are people going to say about me? And he does kind of say, though, he's like, he kind of at one point says, all I did was like expand the empire and like warmonger and like, what did it all mean? There's a great moment, though, where Maximus gets kind of angry and he's basically says something like he doesn't say this explicitly, but the implication is like, I sent dozens of my friends to their deaths. What do you mean this doesn't mean anything?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about this today, especially on the drive over here. I'm like, Marcus Aurelius clearly views Maximus as a surrogate son, but does Maximus reciprocate those feelings?
That's a really good question.
Because
yeah.
there are, especially in that early moment, there are moments where he seems almost not contemptuous, but a little wary around this old man.
Yeah.
Now I'm saying that, but when he finds Marcus Aurelius dead, he does lean over and kiss his brow.
I mean, the ending of the movie, he dictates what Marcus Aurelius wanted for the people
and he
of
does
Rome.
have that line where he's like, Marcus Aurelius, when he's talking to Proximo, and he's like, Marcus Aurelius had a dream that was Rome, and this is not it.
Yeah, I think he still admires him, and I think that maybe his relationship isn't quite a father-son, but maybe it is, because he does see the faults in Marcus Aurelius, but he also respects him and respects his wishes enough to bring those. That's really what the conclusion of the movie is. And I'll talk about maybe one last critique, and I don't even know if it's a full-size critique, but it's the way that the story kind of... We'll talk about this later. I almost don't even want to talk about this now, because it's... This is the thing, is this movie is so large and so all-encompassing and epic that if I bring something up, we're going to spend the next 20 minutes diving into everything leading up to that moment.
We're going to spend the next 20 minutes shouting about it?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll wrap up with my last piece of... Yeah.
Okay, can we... Sorry, this is really jumping ahead.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the final battle? Commodus versus
This is
Maximus.
exactly where I was actually heading.
Oh, okay, great.
So
that one brain cell we're sharing is working overtime right now.
So if we're talking specifically about the fight between Commodus and Maximus, and I've just outlined the character of Commodus and what the attributes of Commodus that I see in him, I think, and even knowing there's some hints that earlier in the film that Commodus actually knows his way around a blade.
I did want to say one thing that I thought was a very masterful stroke, pun intended, was there's a very, very quick scene early on when they're at, they're still camped out near Germania. Maximus gets up, splashes water in his face, whatever. He hears commotion in the distance. He looks, and it's Commodus fighting 4 dudes at once.
Right.
I actually think that adds something to Commodus, because just with that one quick 1 minute scene, you're like, oh, this guy actually knows his way around a sword.
Right.
But then it's funny because it's like, oh, so Commodus is a capable fighter. He's just lazy.
Yeah.
He could be fighting on the front lines, but he's a coward.
So in my research of the real life Commodus, that's actually something that is really interesting about the real life person, is that a lot of him wanting to be a deity and him wanting to be remembered as a god and all of this sort of stuff, and the gladiator fights and the extravagance of Rome and everything, that is something that the real life Commodus did. And he actually did fight as a gladiator for many, many fights. He fought animals. He killed lots of people, hundreds of people in the gladiator arena.
Wow.
In the Colosseum.
Were they fair fights?
That's the thing that's very contentious, is there is a lot of information about those fights likely having the opponent being stabbed in the back just prior to them entering the arena.
That's pretty funny.
And that Commodus likely was not even aware that they had been stabbed in the back before entering.
Yeah, well, you got to imagine, you're too important to just... You'd think, your handlers would be like, okay, this guy is too important to, risk on a stupid fight.
Right.
Yeah.
And what an interesting approach that would have been in this film, taking that from real life, and instead of Commodus stabbing Maximus before the fight, having him in his mind, because he's such a narcissist, thinking that he is going to win this fight so easily that he doesn't stab him, that he just walks away after trying to throw down like the biggest trash talk in his mind ever. And then after he walks out, having the general stab Maximus in the back so that Commodus is going to
have the advantage once again. Yeah.
How much I think that actually would have served Commodus's character that much better, that his own people don't actually believe in his own shtick.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. Sad, but funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think almost that scene almost plays out the exact same way where, he puts on the armor afterwards so that it's less visible that he's obviously
he
injured.
explicitly says to Quintus, like, put his armor on,
right,
conceal the wound.
But I actually think that would have made for a better final piece of the film there.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
That goes with me watching this movie a lot.
Yeah, no, but I see that. I do see. I'm actually, now that you're saying that, I'm surprised Commodus didn't enter the arena himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was, yeah. Huh. Well, I mean, he did at the end. And
yes. Yeah.
I will say, as much as I like this movie, and this isn't even really a criticism, the final fight with Commodus and Maximus is a little underwhelming.
Yes. Okay.
It's not even close.
Yes. I will actually say, and this is the big picture thing that I wanted to get to, and I wanted to air my grievance before, is I actually think the peak of this movie, where this movie hits its absolute highest of the high, is the chariot fight scene.
Okay.
Leading into the Maximus Commodus reuniting together.
When he takes the helmet off?
Yes.
Yeah.
That, to me, is where this movie hits its absolute highest point in the film, where it's so triumphant, where it's like, where he wins over the crowd. This is where Commodus and Joaquin Phoenix, this is his best performance in the entire movie, is when he reveals himself in that momentary, like, that look on Commodus' face, his lip literally quivers.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit,
yeah,
it's this guy.
And it's not only just the fact that like Maximus is there in front of him, it's the fact that all of these people have lied to him, that systematically this has kind of been almost like orchestrated against him. And all these wheels are just turning in his head, like these people that he thought he trusted. And again, this goes to like the bigger ideas of the movie, that, a tyrannical dictator could not like spare weakness in his own ranks. And so you eliminate the people who would ever go against you. So you end up with yes men. And in this case, ending up with yes men are people who are going to tell you that, yes, we killed Commodus. Yes, Commodus is gone, but he's not actually gone. And in this moment, it's just like, completely rocks his world for all of these reasons.
Yeah, and I think that's also the moment where there's some conflict on Maximus's end. He sees Commodus coming, he picks up like a discarded arrowhead, and he's kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna get him.
Right.
But then Lucilla's son, Lucius, I think, shows up, and it's like, he kind of has this moment where it's like, fuck, like,
yeah,
can't kill this guy in front of this nice kid.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this is where the movie almost could have ended here. And there's some great scenes and there's some great dialogue after this, but I think that the movie does lose a half step after this.
I don't agree at all. I think the movie just keeps getting better. I actually think my favorite moment is the fight with Tigris of Gaul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's probably the greatest fight I thought in the movie. So basically, like, they find a champion gladiator and bring him out of retirement to fight Maximus. And then they fight, and then they also start releasing tigers on them while they're fighting.
Right.
Like, it's just, wow.
And it looks fantastic. Like, the tigers...
It's pure cinema.
This is another scene where there is actually some CGI. Like, some of those tigers are actually CGI, but you could never tell. Like, it looks fantastic.
Yeah, no.
And some of them are real. Like, and getting into the effects and filming of that, like, they had those real tigers there in, like, the cages underneath. And apparently, generally speaking, tigers...
Not great actors.
And they got so used to, the thing is, though, is generally speaking, they get a little angry on set with all these people. But because they were there for so long, they actually became accustomed to all the actors around. And it became the opposite, where they struggled to get the tigers riled up enough to actually, like, get up.
It's actually really funny. The tigers actually became too cool with everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really funny. It's like, come on, get angry.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
And this is, I guess, my last fault in the movie. And this is a question that I just want to, like, put out there is... Does the weight of all of these different plot threads become a little overbearing in the final? Really?
I actually think the plot of the movie is dirt simple.
Yeah.
I think it was the creative director of the Last of Us game. I forget what his name is, but he basically said his philosophy for storytelling was simple plot, complex characters.
Right.
And I think that's something I've even tried to emulate in my own work. But like,
Mhm.
I think when you get right down to it, and this is kind of what I mentioned in last week's episode, the movie almost becomes a sports movie.
Yeah.
Like partway through, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like you got to go through the ranks and you got to win the championship, right?
Yep.
Like it's still a historical drama and still an epic, but it becomes almost like, yeah, it becomes a sports movie, right?
Right.
Even the scene that you were mentioning when they're like reenacting the Battle of Carthage or whatever,
Mhm.
Maximus basically, he gets his gang of underdogs and he basically just like, you know, guys, like if we work together, we have a better chance of surviving.
Yep.
And he just rallies everybody together
Yep.
and like, yeah, and they win, you know? You could see this is like ripped straight from like an 80s sports movie.
Yeah, it's epic.
It is epic and incredible, right?
Yeah.
Even like, and then, yeah, then we got Tigris. He fights Tigris of Gaul and like it's advancing through the ranks and fighting more and more difficult opponents,
Yep.
you know? Like,
But the last act, and again, this is where my final critique is the last act. We get the incestuous stuff, which I've already talked about.
gross.
We get.
Yuck.
I don't know if I fully buy into everybody in the world putting all of their hopes and dreams on Maximus.
I don't, you know what? There is this subplot going on with like they're trying to stage a coup against Commodus and
Yeah.
they want him to escape so that he can grab the remains of his army and like take over Rome and all
Mhm.
that stuff. It almost felt like a little bit of an afterthought to me.
Yes,
you
that's
know?
exactly what
and
I
I don't
mean.
think that's a flaw. I don't think that's a flaw, but like it is also just devastating how tits up everything goes too, right? Like
I actually wrote this is a good one. I wrote, "Why the fuck did you tell your son about the planned coup?"
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's why this all falls apart is because Lucius goes and tells Commodus about all of this happening.
Yeah, really. There is a lot of that. It is devastating though. Just I've talked a lot about having to like hit your characters while it hurts.
Yeah.
In the span of like 2 minutes, a bunch of side characters get killed.
Yes.
Proximo goes down. Hagen, the big guy, goes down.
Mhm.
Cicero, the guy with the scar on his face, goes down horribly.
Yeah.
Wow. Like, it's funny. As soon as they recaptured Maximus, I was kind of just like, and we have entered the third act.
And I like all of that happening, but I think it just gets a little bit too big, and like I don't fully believe that everybody's going to put their hopes on Maximus. The other thing is as well, and this is kind of my pre-knowledge of Rome, is that the legions are never ever allowed to come into Rome because the Senate was always afraid of the legions overthrowing, and that is brought up in this movie that, you know, the one senator who does side with Maximus is hesitant.
Gracchus, the
Yeah.
nice one.
He's hesitant to allow the legions in, but I think that, you know,
Well, he even says, he's like, oh, and you're just going to leave once you've taken
exactly,
Rome?
and that's always why legions were never allowed inside of the city of Rome. And so hearing that, and he switches his opinion so quickly. Like he's just like, okay, I see it. I see what everybody else sees in you.
Yeah,
suddenly.
I guess. I don't know. I get what you're saying. It didn't bother me.
Yeah.
I was just kind of like, cool. But then, of course, how, as much as I'm saying it was a little bit anticlimactic, Maximus versus Commodus, like, how else was this movie supposed to fucking end?
Right.
It had to end in the arena.
Yep.
And it had to end with these two going at it.
Yeah.
I will say, even though spectacle-wise, you know, Commodus clearly isn't the greatest opponent Maximus has ever faced,
Mhm.
it is so satisfying watching Commodus's world come crashing down around him, right?
Yeah.
He gets his sword knocked out of his hand, and he turns to the Praetorians, he's like, give me a sword, give me a sword. And then Quintus, the guy who previously betrayed Maximus, is just kind of like, sheath your swords, men.
Right.
And then Commodus pulls out a dagger, and just Maximus just...
Yeah.
It's kind of charming to me how easily he dispatches Commodus.
Right.
Like, he doesn't make him suffer. He just grabs his dagger and, like, shoves it into his neck.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, Maximus is dying at this point. It's almost just like, I promised the gods I would kill you. There, you're dead.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost like the death is, on the one hand, it's like, it was too gently a good night for a total prick like Commodus.
Yeah.
But it also just shows that, like, in Russell Crowe's mind, Commodus isn't worth the hassle.
Yeah.
I'm just, you know what, man? Here you are. You know what? You're dead.
Well, and it's also, again, very public, and like it's such a publicly humiliating way for Commodus to die that I think that that's pretty poetic as well.
Okay, I'm kind of walking back on my own opinion, but like Maximus has been stabbed, potentially even poisoned,
Mhm.
and like he's kind of flashing in and out of the afterlife while all this
Right.
is going on,
Yeah.
right? And like he's clearly weakened and not at his best, and he kills Commodus. he declares the final wishes of Marcus Aurelius, and then he dies.
Yeah.
And there's that great shot of, him walking through the wheat fields of the afterlife to reunite with his family. And then there's that great moment where it's like, this was a good man, and, who will help me carry him? And they carry his body out of there.
Right.
And there's this wide shot where you see them, ferrying his body out of the sands of the arena, and Commodus is just laying there dead.
Yeah.
Like, no, people are like nobody is even... Yeah. Some janitor is going to come by in a few hours and just like with a broom and just like kind of nudge him out of there.
Yeah. It's really one of the all-time great endings of a movie. Like it's so uplifting in a sense, because even though our main character has died, he's at peace.
Even Lucilla, as he's dying, just says like, go to them.
Yes.
And he just block. Isn't it nice to think that at the end, all we're really doing is reuniting with our loved ones?
Yes. So we've been talking about the afterlife, and this is actually something that I wrote down that I really wanted to make sure that we covered, was how the afterlife is kind of something that's woven throughout the story and how it's utilized, because it starts with Maximus in the opening battle scene actually describing it, and you brought it up in the primer episode.
It's like the first shot of the movie, his hand against the wheat.
Yeah, but it's even like him quoting what his vision of the afterlife is to his men, right? And his vision of what the afterlife is essentially the afterlife for him. And then we see it again when he almost dies on his way to becoming a slave and becoming a gladiator. And then in the final sequences of the movie is the last time we see his version of the afterlife, which is him reuniting with his family at his massive estate.
Yeah, being a general must pay really well.
It does.
Like, look at all this land.
Yeah, that's basically how the world used to work. Is you used to be a landowner or you used to be a tenant, and you only got
I
to
don't
be
think
one
much
of
has
two.
changed, Blake.
Yes, correct. What are your thoughts on the afterlife? Like how did the afterlife work for you in this movie?
I thought it was great. I think it's maybe even you could argue that like this is his vision of the afterlife. It's just being with his family on his cute little farm.
That's exactly my take as well, is that this is his dying thoughts of what the afterlife is going to be for him.
Just being with his wife and child again.
Yeah.
In the end. Yeah, no, I get that.
And even like the choice to have his wife and child murdered in the opening act of the film, or I guess maybe it's probably in the ending act of Act 1 or the ending part of Act 1.
Towards the tail end of Act 1.
That actually was a choice that they made kind of last minute directing of the film. Like they ended up last minute deciding that was maybe a little bit more impactful to the character of Maximus. And I think that without it, what is Maximus doing?
Yeah, kind of, right? It's like he's mad because he lost his job.
Yeah.
We could maybe speak to this a little bit later, but like apparently it is a miracle this movie's as good as it is. Like, apparently making this movie was a fucking shit show.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in effects and filming. But yeah, no, I think the afterlife really works effectively in this movie. And it also it again brings up the idea of what I was saying. One of the core themes of this movie is legacy and what do you leave behind. And at a point in the movie, I even wrote down, like, does legacy even matter? Like,
does it? I don't know.
Is it more important to live like a happy and rich life, and then at the end of your life, like, get to look back and reflect on it and all of the things that you've done? And for Maximus, like, the end of his life is actually just the piece of being able to see his family again.
Yeah. Well, again, like, I mean, that's the whole argument they make, right? Is that Marcus Aurelius wants Maximus to take the throne because he doesn't want it.
Right.
He's just a humble guy who wants to harvest his crops.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the other core themes of the movie, right? Is like leaders, and this is something like Game of Thrones almost did very successfully, and I'll say almost because of the last season.
Well,
where Jon Snow is like this reluctant leader who is a strong leader, but he doesn't want the power.
Yeah, see, I've thought about this actually. I think Game of Thrones, that whole thing kind of falls on its face, though, when you think about how in season 1, Robert Baratheon didn't want to be king either. Mm-hmm. And his negligence is what allowed the Lannisters to seize power. So the whole Game of Thrones, like, oh, the best king is the one who doesn't want to be king. I'm like, yeah, fuck off with that shit.
Yeah, but I think that there's more nuance to it, right? Like, Robert didn't want it because Robert was a party boy.
That's a good point, actually. Jon is more noble and more intelligent.
Yeah, he's just intelligent, and he doesn't want to lead because I think part of it is, again, maybe his own fears of power and corruption.
Yeah, potentially. No, without the dead family angle, what does Maximus really have going on?
Yeah.
Right?
We haven't even talked in detail about the opening battle scene, but I want to talk about that.
Okay.
I think that this is one of the best first acts of a movie ever. I think that the battle sequence is epic in scope. It also is like an incredible score. It just, everything about it builds the vibe of the movie. It's funny because when you really think about the battle in its core, you don't care about it. Like, you don't care about who wins and who loses. Like, it's not like this has become this personal, like, quest of the Romans versus the Germanic people. Like, I don't even know any of the characters on the German side.
No, I mean, it's more just about establishing Maximus' character.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And it's so funny that, like I said, this is one of the best opening acts of a movie, and it's also something that people don't even think about when they think about this movie. I always forget how long this first act is.
It's a sign of how good this movie is that it doesn't feel long,
Yeah.
you know?
But it's also, again, like you said, it's funny because it doesn't care about all of these things that you would normally care about in a big epic battle sequence, and it more is just showcasing the strengths of Maximus, the person.
Yeah, really. Who he is and like what he's capable of doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a great piece of writing advice once that it's like in the first chapter, the first scene, you should show your main character excelling at something.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely it. He's
Yeah.
excelling at killing Germans.
But and also just like leading people, right? Like,
Yeah.
everybody loves and respects him.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other scene that we kind of touched on, but I think we should also talk about a little bit more, is the scene where Commodus kills Marcus Aurelius. I think that is, one of the better scenes of the movie as well, and portraying the character of Commodus.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also really interestingly written in the way that it calls back to what actually happened to these people in real life, because Marcus Aurelius was not murdered by Commodus in real life.
No.
They actually co-ruled Rome together for about 3 years before Marcus Aurelius died of the plague.
Oh.
But what's really interesting, Commodus strangles Marcus Aurelius, right? And then later in the film, Gracchus, one of the Roman Senate members, actually says to Commodus, "Have you ever embraced someone dying of the plague?" And it's such a funny little detailed callback to what actually happened. That is probably also what Marcus Aurelius was on his way to dying with at that moment too, right? Because he was sickly by this point in the movie in the opening sequences.
Yeah, that might have just been like old age. Like Lucilla has that line where she's like, he's been dying for 10 years.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually funny. It's like, yeah, we know this isn't historically accurate. Now we're winking at the history buffs in the crowd, right?
Yeah. I think that this is like almost Shakespearean, the way that this whole sequence kind of goes down with these two characters.
I'd say it almost reminded me of The Lion King.
Yeah,
which is
you brought that up
also
before.
Shakespearean.
Yeah.
By the way, that new live action Lion King movie looks fucking terrible. Get that shit out of my face. But I
have
digress.
not watched that. Yeah, I have not watched the trailer. Oh, I did watch the trailer for that. It was in one of the movies that I went and saw in the last 6 months. I think might have been when you and I went and saw
The Substance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh god, yeah, it did look awful, didn't it?
Yeah, gross. Anyways, it is interesting. So Marcus Aurelius, and this isn't a fault in the movie, I really wanted to know more. Like, I almost wish there was a novelization about this movie, because I want to know more about his and Commodus's relationship.
That's where I kind of said this in the primer, but if they had spent 20 minutes in the first act doing maybe callbacks to Marcus Aurelius and Commodus and Maximus's relationship 30 years prior, I think that there's an argument to be made that strengthens some of the issues that I have, and the issues that you seem to have are not necessarily even an issue, just the want for more.
Yeah, and it's better to be left wanting more than to be sick of it by the end. Like, so Marcus Aurelius talks to his son, Commodus, and he basically just tells him very bluntly, like, my powers will not pass to you. And he goes, oh, well, which wise old senator will take the throne? He's like, I'm just going to give it to Maximus. And then Commodus kind of has this great speech where he talks about how his dad wrote him a letter once outlining like the 4 virtues.
Mm-hmm.
Then Commodus pitches his alternative virtues, like ambition, the desire to excel.
Right.
And he says courage, perhaps not on the battlefield. And then, he kind of starts breaking down. And then Marcus Aurelius gets on his knees and says, like, your faults as a son are my failings as a father.
What a deep cut.
Yeah, right. And there's another earlier moment with him and Lucilla where he goes like, I wish you'd been a man. Like, I wonder, would you have been just?
Mm-hmm.
And then he just goes like, oh, enough of this. Let's pretend that you're a loving daughter and that I'm a good father.
Yeah.
And then she goes, oh, isn't this a pleasant fiction? And then, so like, yeah, it's really interesting. I heard a quote once by somebody that like great men are often bad fathers because they're just not around all that much.
Yeah, and this is a great man movie, right?
I wonder, like, so Marcus Aurelius is clearly consumed with regret at the end of his life, and
As we all are.
I'm consumed. I'm consumed with regret right now. But no, like, it's just. It seems like he has this weird like revulsion towards his own son, but he also has a lot of guilt for that, you know?
Right.
Anyways, and then it's also like he clearly doesn't know Commodus as well as he thinks he does, that he's like, I'm just going to tell you this and like you're going to take it. You're going to be a cool dude about it.
Yeah.
Right? He does bring Lucilla with Commodus cuz he thinks Lucilla can like calm him down and placate him and blah blah blah, but it's funny, there's this great line in Avatar The Last Airbender where Zuko says to Uncle Iroh, like, you know, for a wise old man, that was pretty stupid.
That's great.
So anyways, and it is a very chilling scene.
Mm.
Also, that's 2 movies we've done this year with a death scene involving a marble bust.
True.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Only in this one, he didn't bonk him on the head with it.
Was that other one Marcus Aurelius's head too?
Could have been.
I can't remember. I actually brought that up while we were doing that episode, and I don't remember if it was Marcus Aurelius or not now.
Some Roman dude. Close enough.
No, it wasn't. It was like Nero or somebody.
Oh.
Because it harkened back to what actually was going on in The Talented Mr. Ripley in that scene.
Interesting.
Side note, I wrote down when Commodus was back at Rome, I was elected to lead, not to read.
Yeah, basically. There's that great scene where they're like, the senators are talking to him and he's just crouched over, like playing, like kind of flicking us at a sword.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the great scene that illustrates, I'm like, this guy really isn't interested in statecraft. He's interested in like bolstering his own ego. He's
a person who just is so hyper focused on his persona and what other people think of him and expect him to be and everything that's all he cares about, right? Like he wants so desperately to look like the strong man that it becomes like a point of parody almost in a sense.
Yeah, he's so weak.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just, again, it's so relevant. It's so funny. It's how relevant this comes around. How human beings just like
don't learn a goddamn thing.
We're just such creatures of pattern.
We really are, aren't we?
Yeah.
I'm depressed.
Anyway, we haven't talked about Proximo at all.
Proximo!
Because Proximo is, again, one of the highlights in the movie, in my opinion. He's a fantastic.
I think he's actually the best actor in the movie.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's funny because the actor, I believe Oliver Reed, this is the thing that he's most known for, and he unfortunately passed away while they were making this movie.
Yeah, I know they were originally going to have him fight Maximus in the arena, but they couldn't exactly do that when he was dead.
I've seen this movie like 12 times. I had no idea that he died during the making of this and that they had to kind of digitally recreate him and change the storyline to have him get murdered for conspiring against Commodus in the way that he does.
Yeah, really. And like it's a miracle this movie even works. But no, he's great. Like he was a gladiator, but he was released by Marcus Aurelius himself.
And he just adores and loves Marcus Aurelius. Like he worships him like a god.
There's that great scene where he's talking to like Maximus and he explains all this. And Maximus kind of just laughs. He's like, you knew Marcus Aurelius?
Yeah.
And he gets really defensive. And he's like, I did not say that I knew him. Merely that he touched me on the shoulder once.
Right.
Yeah.
And gave him the sword.
Yeah.
His freedom.
Basically, right?
And I really love that there's kind of this parallel between Maximus and Proximo in that way, right?
Yeah, it's almost like Mickey and Rocky, right?
Yep.
Well, and Proximo's the one who's basically just like, you got to entertain them. You can't kill them too quickly, right?
Right. And I'm sure that Proximo at one point in his life was actually more similar to Maximus than he lets on. I get that vibe from him.
Probably, yeah. When Maximus talks to him about all his big plot, and Proximo's basically just like, why would I let you go? You're making me rich.
Yeah.
And Maximus says, like, you know, he basically says the man who I'm going to kill killed Marcus Aurelius or something. And Proximo's like, Oh.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, even Proximo, even though I'm saying that there's parallels, Proximo, at the end of the day, is a lesser person than Maximus is, even in that sense, because he was also somebody who was corrupted by wealth and power.
Shadows and dust.
Yes.
You know what, though? For as much as he preaches nihilism and like the fatalism of death and blah, 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 he still takes a stand at the end.
He does.
And allows Maximus to escape for all that it amounts to.
Can I just say that one of my favorite quotes of the entire movie is when Proximo is negotiating for the purchase of the gladiators, and he says, "I'll give you $2,000 for the fighters, $4,000 for the animals, and that's $5,000 for an old friend." And he just like swindles the guy out of like $1,000.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you sold me queer giraffes. Yeah. No, Proximo was just delightful.
Just delightful. Yeah, he's great.
Apparently, him and Russell Crowe did not get along during the filming of this movie, and you wouldn't know it.
Apparently, very much butted heads. Whereas I think Joaquin Phoenix and him really got along well, though.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Yeah,
I suppose. Hello, Joaquin. It's time to shoot our scene together.
This is a random thing, but I think we're kind of winding down this section of our discussion. The snake gambling game, very small, just pops up for like 30 seconds on screen, where they shake up the cobra and then they pull the thing out and everybody's throwing money and trying to pull money out from the cobra.
Is that a real thing?
Did you notice that, though?
I did notice that.
I didn't find a lot of information online about it. I kind of did probably spend about 10 minutes trying to figure out how to Google a way to figure that out. The only thing that I found was somebody asking a similar question to me about it, and the only response to it was actually really I thought was something that, you know, has kind of stuck with me since, and that's why I brought it up. There's an interpretation of it that it's the slaves who are playing this and they're just bored and kind of trying to pass the time by playing this silly game of try to take the money before the snake bites you. And really the consequence is if you get bit, you die because it's a cobra, it's a poisonous cobra. But the thing is like they're slaves and their life has no meaning.
They're so bored. Yeah,
and so like what does it matter if one of them loses this game? Because at the end of the day, they're just dead men anyway. And that's, you know, a focal point of the movie is...
So now, you know, they've done studies that show that, like, if you put people in a room with nothing to do long enough, you can... I think they did a study recently, or within the last 12 years, like, they put people in a room and instructed them to just sit there, but they also gave them a watch where if you pressed a button, it would administer a small electric shock.
Uh-huh.
And they basically said, just have to sit there and do nothing. All you can do is push the button if you want. And I think a lot of people ended up just shocking themselves because they were so bored.
Yeah. I don't know. That's the other, like, big theme of the movie, right? Is, like, death and life, and does your life
Cobras.
have any meaning? And death is always ever present around the corner, and what does it matter what you do here? And,
legacy.
Yeah, legacy. Like, does legacy matter, or just in living in the moment? Is that what's important?
Are you gonna get the money, or are you gonna get the cobra?
Yeah.
Are you gonna get that cash, or are you gonna get those fangs? I really liked Hagen, the big German guy.
Yeah, I guess I should have brought that up too.
Yeah.
He's really great. Like he
doesn't have a lot to do, but he's great.
When he opens, you think that he's going to be like the big bad of this act 2 of the movie, right? And then he quickly just kind of falls in line with Maximus.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he's German and Maximus has just apparently spent 2 years fighting Germans. And he even kind of says obliquely, like, you know, you fought like on the German frontier or something a lot, didn't you? And I think Maximus just kind of blows it off like, I fought a lot of people, okay? Like, I'm paraphrasing.
Don't take it personally.
Yeah,
that's great. Sequels, prequels, and reboots. So part of the reason why we're talking about this, not only is it a great movie, but there's a sequel coming out, and it is coming out on November 22nd. Gladiator 2.
Pedro Pascal is in it.
There's a lot of people in it. I have heard talk that this movie is pretty good, and that Denzel Washington and Paul Mescal are so good in this that they're potentially up for Oscars.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. It might actually be good.
Yes.
I actually do not have high hopes for that movie, but
early reception, the critics who have seen it so far have said that they really enjoyed it.
Okay, well, maybe this really is just Ridley Scott's comfort zone.
So we'll see. I'm looking forward to it. I'll probably go see it in theaters, but
maybe we'll both go see it in theaters.
Yeah, maybe we'll do another review episode of it.
Maybe we will, and I'll let you edit it. I'll let you take that one for the team.
Nice. Where this is based on is, I've kind of already alluded to the fact that this is based on real life characters. However, it's highly liberal with what kind of
Can I just say that, like, I respect historical fiction and I respect people playing fast and loose with historical events if it makes for a better movie.
I agree, because movies aren't meant to necessarily be, windows into history, and everything needs to be like 100%
That said,
accurate.
can you imagine if the real historical Commodus is watching this movie from heaven being like, I didn't try to nail my sister? What is this? Like,
that would be something he would say too, right?
Yeah, that would indeed. Actually, I'm saying this, maybe in 200 years they'll make a movie about me and I'll be watching it from heaven like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I didn't strangle Blake. Like, I just stabbed him.
I do agree with you that in service of story and the movie that you have to sometimes take creative liberties. And like with some things, even it was like a case of like, okay, well, this didn't happen here. This happened 200 years ago. Like the costumes of the Germans, it was like, that was like maybe a few hundred years ago. That's what their costumes were, what their battle dress was. But that kind of, they got away from that at that point. It's like, that's like a little difference. That still actually happened. It's just, okay, different period of time, right?
I actually did want to bring up, in terms of historical accuracy, apparently they were going to do this thing where they were going to include sponsorships in the Roman arena. But Ridley Scott was talked out of including it because it seemed too ridiculous. But it's just so funny that actually happened.
Yeah.
It just seems so preposterous that you couldn't put it on film.
Right.
I remember when the first Hobbit movie came out, my friend Derek went and saw it. And he complained that they mentioned golf in the movie. And he was like, he literally said, I can't believe they broke the fourth wall like that. That's so stupid. But then golf has been around for hundreds of years.
Right.
It's not an anachronism, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting how, and this is a TV tropes term, sometimes reality is unrealistic.
Yeah. That's one of those things where, again, they changed it in service of believability, even though that was actually what happened.
Yeah, I know, right? And isn't that just... humans really don't change, do we?
No, absolutely not.
We're all just monkeys.
2,000 years ago, we were getting served advertisements every 2 minutes during the Gladiator fights.
Yeah, right? So, like, if YouTube ads grind your gears now, just be grateful that they're not blocking your view of someone getting his head cut off.
Yeah.
That was a weird sentence, but I'm sticking by it.
The script of Gladiator is based in some other fictional or nonfiction story, 1958 book, For Those About to Die, by Daniel Mannix.
What a title.
Yeah, and republished in 2001 as The Way of the Gladiator. Because of this movie, they changed the title of it. It's also based on a novel called Historia Augusta, which is a historic writing from a few hundred years ago about this time period, because, again, this time period, these characters did exist in some form.
Interesting.
Commodus was a real person. He was a dictator. He wanted to be like a god in Rome. He fought as a gladiator back in these times. He did actually get assassinated, and there were multiple assassination attempts against him. The way that he was assassinated was actually by the senators. They conspired and had a wrestler strangle him in a bathhouse.
In a bathhouse?
Yes.
Huh. Interesting.
Commodus is often attributed as one of the main contributors to the fall of the Roman Empire.
Wow, is that bad, eh?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was reading a lot about him. He's a fascinating character in history because he spent so much money in Rome trying to become this like god-like figure that he actually in part devalued the Roman currency and like led to inflation and just a whole crisis going on, essentially.
Wow. No parallels at all,
yep.
I guess. Huh.
Yeah, pretty wild, eh?
Pretty wild.
Effects and filming. So this is something that I think we brought up once before maybe, but it doesn't happen very often that this movie was shot in chronological order, that they actually filmed each scene as it played out in the film.
Yeah, well, they were kind of trying to find the plot as they went.
Yeah, that's
right?
probably why they did it, actually,
like,
right?
Like, just film some shit.
Yeah, they only had like part of a script written at that point, and like they kept rewriting it. They didn't like the dialogue. Like Russell Crowe famously hated the dialogue, and he kept changing it as they went.
Well, I do find it really funny. I think there's this quote where like he told one of the screenwriters, he's like, "Your lines are garbage, but I'm the greatest actor in the world, and I can make even garbage sound great."
Yeah.
And by the way, I hope we should all aspire to that kind of confidence, you know? Imagine if I just walked in and I'm like, I'm the greatest writer in the world.
The screenwriter actually said afterwards, he was like, in his defense, my lines probably were garbage.
Yeah. I don't know. See, and like I write fantasy, so I'm sympathetic. Like it's hard hitting that tone right?
Yeah.
Where like you're writing fantasy or historical fiction, so like you can't use modern vernacular or modern slang, but you also don't want it to be so obtuse that it sounds preposterous or ridiculous, right? And I do think the screenwriter did a good job hitting those notes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, and this is maybe the difference in mediums, when you're reading it on a page, maybe it could come across as hokey, but you also have at play in a film, you have the score that's either working for or against you. You have the way that the shot is framed that's working for or against you and making dialogue look cheesy. You have the actors themselves. Like if an actor is saying something really impassioned, then their passion in what they're saying might outweigh some of the corny dialogue. Because I'm sure if I were to read every single line of dialogue, that I would probably find some corniness in there. But it's the way that they're like, with the way that it all comes together, right?
It all comes together in the wash.
Yep.
It all comes out together in the wash.
Setting of the film, so all of the desert scenes and the gladiator training stuff all was shot in Morocco. They shot all of the Roman scenes in Malta, and they actually built a 1/3 replica of the Colosseum that was 16 meters high, 52 feet high.
That's quite a bit. I was wondering, I'm like, did they shoot part of this in the actual Colosseum?
Yeah,
Wow.
No, they didn't shoot part of it in the real Colosseum. They built like the size of the real Colosseum, 1/3. The other 2/3 they said they added digitally. So Russell Crowe, I kind of feel for the guy as well though, being on set, because
He got fucked up.
he really did. He there's a whole description of all of the things that happened to him. Like even in the battle scene, the opening battle scene, he got cut up pretty bad, like scratched by tree branches and stuff.
Aww.
And there's sequences in the movie where some of the cuts and stuff on his face are actually really there. Like he has stitches in one scene and those stitches were real. It's really interesting that they kind of had to work with
I can understand why he was a little miserable during the filming of this. I think he said that this movie left him with just this consistent lower back pain that he just can't get rid of.
Yep.
Even today.
Yeah. It's wild.
He had some bicep, I think he said he had some bicep tendons that popped out of their sockets.
Ugh.
During a sword fight, he lost feeling in 2 fingers and it didn't return for years.
Yeah, it's wild. He put his body on the line for this movie.
Yeah, I know, right? And what a body too, right? No, but this was pre-Marvel where he looks like a normal guy.
Mm-hmm.
He looks fit, but he looks like a normal fit guy that you might pass on the street.
Yeah.
He's not all roided out.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot. I was going to mention this too. The Colosseum. I actually did some research on the actual real Colosseum as well.
Okay.
Because I wanted to know how many people the Colosseum actually did hold in real life. And it held anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 spectators at a time.
That's pretty freaking cool.
It's massive. That's insane.
I do love the scene where the attendants are just chucking bread at the masses.
Yeah.
Free bread.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking if there's a place I could go now where I could watch people fight to the death for free and there's a chance I might get tossed free bread, I would go.
You know what they should have had is they should have had little trebuchets that shot out t-shirts.
Fuck yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it would have been great. Joaquin Phoenix ad-libbed a lot of his lines just like Russell Crowe did. The "Am I not merciful" line, he yelled at Connie Nielsen, who was not expecting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Connie Nielsen found her ring that she was wearing in this movie in a antique store, and it's a 2,000-year-old signet ring.
Good for her.
Pretty
Good
cool, eh?
for her.
Pretty cool.
Apparently, Joaquin Phoenix was gaining weight throughout the shooting of this movie. And I guess Ridley Scott confronted him about it, but he was kind of just well, I'm the emperor. Of course I'm gaining weight.
Yeah. And then after that, he stopped because Ridley Scott was mad at him for doing it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, and part of it, I think, is Ridley Scott said something along the lines of, I didn't want to make a movie where it was just Romans eating grapes off of their stomach or whatever,
Yeah, the
using
classic image.
Yeah, all of those kind of tropes. So I think that probably rubbed him the wrong way that Joaquin Phoenix was gaining all of this weight during his movie because that's specifically what he didn't want.
Yeah, what a body Joaquin Phoenix has too, right? He just like weight-wise, I mean, he just fluctuates.
Hey man, I get it.
Can't be healthy. But it's funny. Apparently, like I watched the movie knowing all that. I'm like, he looks the same in every
He
shot.
does.
So,
I really didn't
did
notice
he
a
eat
big
too many
difference.
bagels one day and everybody got mad at him? Like, come on.
The tiger scene. You said that that's one of your favorite scenes of the whole movie, your favorite fight scene.
Yes.
They almost used rhinos instead of tigers in that scene. But
Fuck.
they couldn't train the rhinos, and the CGI rhinos looked bad.
Huh.
Yes.
Well, maybe there's going to be rhinos in the new one.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, Ridley Scott's like, I've been waiting for this for 20 years. I can make more rhinos.
This is a thing with the thumbs up to signify that the gladiator would like live, and then the thumbs down would be like to the death. That was actually opposite in real life. So that goes back to what you were saying about real life not being, what real life
realistic.
happened.
Yeah.
The sword down or the thumbs down means sheath your sword, and the thumbs up means no mercy. Get to the stabbing. Swords.
Stab.
Swords. Stabby stab.
Stab.
Yeah.
Let me stab him with your sword till he dies.
So they decided to flip that around because of modern day.
Well, yeah. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
When I grade student papers now, I do the same thing where I'm like, thumbs down. Sorry, buddy.
The other thing with the tiger scene that I forgot to mention as well is the tigers entering through the trapdoors. That's actually something that does happen at the Colosseum. Like, they have trapdoors and
Fuck yeah,
tunnels
that's
built.
awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, eh? And elevators were built into the Colosseum. Like, the Roman Empire, pretty advanced. Pretty neat.
Pretty neat. Yeah, they knew how to build death traps.
Yep.
If
And they knew
nothing
about
else.
Plumbing.
That too.
I almost wrote a script idea about Roman plumbers.
I think you've mentioned this to me before, and I think you pitched this to me once, and it's not a bad idea. Aqueduct. That's a fun word.
Yeah. What did you think about Maximus constantly picking up dirt and smelling it throughout the movie? Did you think about that at all? And the significance?
You mean like when he's like dusting his hands with it?
Yeah.
That reminded me of like a bodybuilder like using chalk on his hands before he lifts something.
But he also smells it before too.
Oh yeah. Well, he's a farmer, right?
Yeah.
He would know what dirt's all about.
So it's supposed to apparently signify mortality and potentially him returning to the soil if he dies during battle, and also just like it could be his good luck charm before battle.
I prefer
right?
to think of it as Maximus touching grass. Like, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought it was a neat detail, especially like during the big battle scenes when like everyone's getting to war and he just kneels down. He's like, got some dirt on my hands.
Yeah, it's just like one of those small moments that adds to the scene.
It adds to the character, right?
Yeah, exactly. They created more than 10,000 costumes for the film.
And Joaquin Phoenix wore all of them.
One point or another.
Yeah, hey-o.
You know what we haven't talked about this movie yet is the score of this film and just how legendary.
The Hans Zimmer score?
The Hans Zimmer score. This is one of the best scores of all time.
It is fantastic, but like I rewatched Pirates of the Caribbean last year and I kept waiting for like, when Maximus is fighting in the arena, I kept waiting for like Jack Sparrow to wander into frame.
It's so funny because I was watching this last night and I wrote down in my notes, this really reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah. And it's funny because Hans Zimmer actually ripped parts of this because he did this in Pirates of the Caribbean. He ripped parts of this and put it in Pirates of the Caribbean as well.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah.
I mean, you can rip yourself off. I do it all the time.
Exactly. I thought that was really funny, but it also just the early 2000s have some of the best scores of all time, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah. I was actually, didn't Hans Zimmer also do the Dark Knight movies?
Yes.
Yeah, I was listening to an orchestral soundtrack of that recently.
Yeah. He's one of the greats of all time. He's going to be remembered as one of the best composers of film.
Is he still working today?
Yeah. He does a lot of Chris Nolan's movies. He didn't do Tenet, I believe. I believe instead of Tenet, he was working with Jordan Peele on Nope.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yes.
I remember Nope. We saw it in theaters.
I love that movie. I think that movie's great.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time.
Gladiator.
Yep.
Huh. Nice.
I could listen to it. I could just like throw it on and listen to it while I'm doing something. It's pretty sick.
We're going to go somewhere after this. Maybe I'll put it on in the car.
Yeah. And then we have to talk Oscars and the legacy of the movie, right? This movie was nominated for 12 Oscars, believe it or not.
I do believe it.
And it won 5 Oscars.
Okay, I know Russell Crowe got Best Actor.
Yes.
That's all I know.
Best Picture. It did win Best Picture in 2001.
Oh, okay.
It won Best Director for Ridley Scott. I believe that was his first
Did he? Are
pretty
you sure he won Best Director?
No, I'm wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Won Best Costume. It won Best Sound, which, like I said, I fully agree with. But it didn't win Best Music Original Score, which is weird.
That is weird.
And then it won Best Effects and Visual Effects, which absolutely you and I
For the
agree
time,
with.
for sure. Yeah.
Well, even now it looks incredible, right? Like you don't notice the CGI in this movie.
No, you really don't.
I
So-
was shocked that there was heavy use of CGI in this one. Like the Roman Empire, I kind of noticed it on this viewing because I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of 300 a little bit in the way aesthetically how they're showing the Roman Empire. But even then, it doesn't detract from it at all. If anything, like just kind of goes to show if you use it properly, if you use it as background and that's not the focal point, then it can really enhance the overall atmosphere of the film.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you're Ridley Scott.
Yep.
You don't win Best Director.
Yep.
But your movie does win Best Picture. Are you still going home in a good mood that night?
I think so because
I mean, what's really the difference between Best Director and Best Picture?
also like who really cares at the end of the day about like the awards? Like, yeah, you care a bit, I'm sure, when you're there, but it also is just kind of like
It's Hollywood kind of filleting itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I read that Russell Crowe didn't think he deserved Best Actor.
Mm-hmm.
He thought everybody was great in the movie.
Let's see who won Best Director in that year. Steven Soderbergh won Best Director in 2001 for Traffic, a movie that I have never heard of.
Okay. Well, good for him, I guess.
We should watch that movie. It actually looks pretty decent.
Oh, well, I mean, he won Best Director.
It's got Don Cheadle, Benicio del Toro, Michael Douglas. Yeah, all right, I'm in.
Bunch of Marvel actors, pre-Marvel.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a crime. It's a crime film.
Ah, it's a crime. We haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I might go check that out, actually.
Okay.
Anyway.
Has what's his face ever won Best Director?
Don't think he won for Alien. He might have been nominated for Alien, though. He has not won an Oscar. He has won Primetime Emmys, and he's won Golden Globes.
Oh, everyone's won those. I have 3 in the back of my car right now.
He has been nominated at the Academies 4 times. He was nominated Best Picture for Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, and The Martian.
Okay.
Hot take, I think The Martian is way better than a lot of people remember. And I think people really like that movie.
I've never seen it.
What?
Yeah, never seen it, bro.
Oh my God. You and I got to watch The Martian sometime.
I guess we do. It's Matt Damon on Mars, right?
It's so good. It is
Yeah.
like, genuinely speaking. So we did it earlier this year. We did our movie draft, the 2010s movie draft, and I'm a big sci-fi guy. It's probably my 3rd favorite sci-fi movie of the 2010s.
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
Love it.
I'll have to watch it
Love
before the end of the year.
It's so good. I don't think that The Martian's as good as Gladiator, but I think it's a close 3rd in his
Pretty
filmography.
fucking good, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
All right, we'll watch it.
So before we get into personal reviews and the partner factor, I do want to also note that like the legacy of this movie is the 2000s and 2010s became just like an absolute sword and sandals historic movie fest.
I remember. I was there.
How many can you name?
Troy.
Yep.
Which isn't great.
Troy's not great.
Kingdom of Heaven.
Kingdom of Heaven, director's cut, decent.
Pretty great.
Good, not great. I would say it's good, not great. 300,
300.
great.
Great.
Yes.
Good. Best Zack
Only-
Snyder movie.
I think I agree, but I do have to watch his Dawn of the Dead because his Dawn of the Dead is a movie that has stuck with me for almost 20 years now.
Okay.
I think Dawn of the Dead is very, very good. Robin Hood, not good.
No.
Exodus, Gods and Kings, never watched. Couldn't
Right.
be
Okay, well now we're going beyond the little... There was a very brief trend
Yes,
where
there
Sword
was-
Sandal was back.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, like 6 years. King Arthur, didn't see it.
nope. I'm sure it's fine.
Personal reviews and the partner factor. Where do you sit with this one?
I'd give this a 10 out of 10. I really enjoyed this movie.
And-
I watched it alone on my phone, like
Yep.
I mentioned. Just, I had a little brief window where I could watch it, so I watched it. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, no, I had a really good time.
You said it's probably in your top 10?
Probably my top 10.
That's wild.
You're wild.
You know what? I say that's wild, but I do not fault anyone for thinking that this is a masterpiece because I think that this is a flawed masterpiece. I think for me, this is like a 9 out of 10. This is a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like, I think this movie is incredible. It's just, I would have made a few different choices.
Okay.
Again, I've watched this movie like upwards of 20 times. Like, I've watched this movie anywhere from 12 to 20 times. I've seen this movie a lot. I've watched this movie since probably like I was, 13-ish up until now.
See,
So many
I wish I
times.
had watched it when I was younger,
Yeah.
because I think it would have stuck with me even more.
Yeah.
I also want to just say, and I'm just remembering this now, I remember watching it for the first time a couple years ago and then going on a date a few nights later, and the woman was telling me about how she was talking about like male role models and how like what is a good fictional role model for young men. And I had just seen this movie and I was kind of like, I think Maximus is a good role model for young men. Like, he's a family man. He's capable of violence, but he's not a violent guy.
Yep.
He's humble.
Yep.
Like, he does the right thing. He's soft-spoken. I think Maximus is the guy.
I agree with you. Again, I think this movie is really good. Question for you. Where does this sit in your Ridley Scott filmography? Because I know you've seen probably a similar amount of Ridley Scott movies as me, although you haven't seen The Martian, which blows my mind. But you've seen, I know you've seen Blade Runner. I know you've seen Alien. I know you've seen Gladiator. I know you've seen like Prometheus.
This is probably my top Ridley Scott movie.
Yep.
I haven't seen everything he's done. Like I
mean, there's a lot of bad movies that Ridley Scott has made.
Yeah, he's such an interesting guy where he just churns them out and like they're either good or they're bad.
Yep.
But like you got to respect the hustle, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them are...
You know what? At the end of my life, if I've published 10 novels and only 5 of them are good, I'll still consider that a successful career.
I think the other thing with Ridley Scott is sometimes his movies take a little bit of simmering and, they have to cook for a little bit before they get recognized as either masterpieces or complete dog shit. Like, The Last Duel apparently is incredible, and I have not yet seen it.
I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, The Last Duel is a movie. It came out the last few years. It's got, like, Matt Damon in it, and apparently it's really good, but nobody went and saw it. It kind of did mixed critically, but since then it's kind of starting to get a little bit of traction, I think.
Kind of like everyone hated The Shining when it came out, but then 5 years later, everyone was like, oh, we were just kidding, Stanley. It's a masterpiece.
Blade Runner's a great example. Blade Runner came out and really mixed reception, and it's considered one of the greatest movies of all time.
I still think it's fucking boring, but go on.
I think as well that Alien Covenant is a very good movie that unfortunately some of Ridley Scott's like later filmography woes people just generally don't like, but I like that movie a lot this year.
Okay.
My take is that Alien's a better movie, but Gladiator is a more watchable movie, and I've seen it way more than I've seen Alien.
Interesting.
But I think Gladiator is my second favorite Ridley Scott movie, and then after that it's really a toss-up between Blade Runner and The Martian.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. I think I like The Martian. Again, The Martian might be more rewatchable than Blade Runner is, but I think I respect Blade Runner more as a movie. But The Martian is really, really good. Like, really, really good.
So the theme of tonight's episode was Michael needs to watch The Martian, and so do you at home if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But Ridley Scott is at his best when he's either making movies that are big crowd pleasers and, like, full of hope and full of fun. Like, The Martian's a very, very fun movie. Gladiator, for all of the, like, dramatics and everything, is a really fun movie, crowd-pleasing movie.
Yeah.
I think also deeply personal movies. Like, I think Alien was a deeply personal movie that he made, and, like, he spent a lot of creative juices on that one. Same with Blade Runner. I think also, like, something that he's fiddled with over the years quite a bit to try to, like, nail down exactly what he was going for with that one.
Stop fiddling, though. Just stop it.
I have no problem with people fiddling on their films.
Okay, I'm glad you finished that sentence and didn't just go, I have no problem with people fiddling, period.
Also, whatever you want to do at home is up to you.
Okay, great. I'm learning the
I ain't
fiddle.
going to tell you about what you can and cannot do.
Okay, well.
That's not me.
Blake's a pro fiddler.
You can do it on the roof. I don't care.
On your roof?
Fiddler on the roof.
All right. We're really losing the thread here.
Yeah, we are. What's your least favorite Ridley Scott movie that you've seen?
Probably Robin Hood.
Okay.
I remember watching that at like 17 or 18, and even then just being like, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, it's such a boring movie. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It's not even that it's bad. It's just boring.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's expertly well made and boring.
Yep. Just like us.
Yeah. Unless you have anything else you want to share, I think that's it. I think that's our Gladiator movie discussion.
That's our Gladiator rundown.
Yeah. Had a lot of fun with this one.
Me too. I'm glad we watched it.
I'm going to get, if people are listening to this, I'm going to get torn apart because I said bad things about Gladiator, but I stand by them.
I'm just glad that for once it was you being the asshole and not me being the asshole. I'm just sitting here like, what are you talking about? It's great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's what happens when you watch a movie a bunch.
A bunch, yeah.
On that note,
Well, I would like to, courage and honor to all those who are facing Blake in the arena.
We'll see you next time. Tell your dad.
Thumbs down.